Today I turned 73 years old. I woke up at 6:30 as usual, though I haven't needed to get up that early for a long time. A habit developed over decades of having to open the store by 8. Clive had always said that getting up early was a sign of discipline. Clive said a lot of things. Most of his wisdom turned out to be just words. I got out of the bed I'd slept in alone for 10 years and went to the window Frankfurt was waking up with me. The old letter carrier Bert was already delivering the morning mail. Mrs. Hamilton was walking her pug, and the lights were on in the Jenkins bakery. 50 years I've seen the same picture, but the faces change. Bert's father used to deliver the mail. Mrs. Hamilton had a cat instead of a dog, and the Jenkins parents owned the bakery. And I was not an old woman, but a young woman with 3 children and a husband who promised me the world. My reflection in the window pane reminded me that there wasn't much left of that young woman. Gray hair that I'd stopped dyeing 5 years ago, wrinkles that I'd stopped hiding under makeup around the same time, arms with protruding veins and knotted joints, the result of years of working in the store where Clive and I sold hardware. I still remember the feel of heavy boxes of nails, cans of paint, rolls of wallpaper that had to be dragged from place to place. The phone on the nightstand was silent. I didn't expect a call. My children rarely remember my birthday. Last year, Marilyn sent a card 3 days late. Patrick sent a Facebook message, and Edwin called, but only to ask for money for a new stereo. I put on an old robe, went down to the kitchen, and put the kettle on. I opened the fridge, half empty, as usual. Why cook for one person? I took out an egg, some cheese, the last tomato. An omelet for a birthday breakfast. Why not? While I was making breakfast, my thoughts, as always, went back to the past. The day I met Clive Talbot at a local school dance. I was only 18, he was 22. He had just returned from the army, so handsome in his uniform, with a confident smile and stories of the places he had been. I had never traveled outside of Frankfurt and listened to him with my mouth open. 3 months later, we were married, and another year later, Marilyn was born. I remember holding her in my arms, so small, so defenseless. Clive was happy, especially when Patrick was born 2 years later. He had a son now, a continuation of the family name. We lived in a small apartment above the store that Clive had inherited from his father. Money was barely enough, but we were young and hopeful. Edwin was born when I was 25, an unplanned but beloved third child. Clive had started drinking by then, not heavily but regularly. Things weren't going as well as he'd hoped at the store, and he was drowning his frustrations in whiskey. I started working more at the store, leaving the kids in my mother's care. And when Mom got sick, I had to be torn between the kids, the store, and taking care of her. Clive was staying out in bars more and more. He came home more often, staggering and cursing. Never laid a hand on me. I can't blame him for that. But words sometimes hurt more than punches, especially when spoken by the person you love. I remember Marilyn asking me at 12 why I didn't leave Daddy. "Because family comes first, honey," I replied at the time. But the truth was that I had no idea how I would support 3 children on my own, with no education, no skills, no support. My mother had died by then, leaving me with only old photographs and a shabby Bible. The omelet burned while I was reminiscing. I turned off the stove and transferred it to a plate. A burnt breakfast on my birthday is a fitting symbol for my life. I always felt like I was about to have time to do something right. But things went wrong at the last minute. Marilyn grew up stubborn and determined. She excelled in school, always bringing home awards. She was so much like me on the outside, but different on the inside. I never knew how to stand up for myself, but she did since she was a little girl. At 18, she got a scholarship to law school and left, rarely coming home. Now she's a successful attorney in Chicago, married to an equally successful businessman. They have 2 children, my grandchildren, whom I've only seen in pictures on social media. Patrick followed in his father's footsteps, not in terms of drinking, but in terms of lack of ambition. He graduated from community college, got a job as a clerk at an insurance company, and married a nice girl named Deirdre. They have 3 kids, live 2 hours away from me. They call once in a while, once a year for Christmas. Patrick was always a quiet, unobtrusive kid, and he's become that way as an adult. And then there was Edwin, my youngest. the most handsome of my children with dimples on his cheeks and a charming smile. Clive used to spoil him when he was sober. "This is my little prince," he'd say, tossing the giggling baby up to the ceiling. And then he'd retire to the bar for the evening, leaving me to deal with a crying baby, chores, and bills. Edwin grew up knowing he could get anything he wanted just by smiling and asking. First from me, then from teachers, then from girls. He changed colleges like a glove. Nowhere could he find something he really liked. Changed jobs just as often. And always came home when the money ran out. I finished my tea and looked at the clock. It was almost 8. Time to get ready for book club, the only entertainment I allow myself. Once a week, we get together with similarly aged women at the library and discuss books that would hardly interest anyone under 60. I walk slowly up the stairs, feeling the pain in my knees. The arthritis is progressing, but I try to ignore it. The doctor says surgery is needed, but who will take care of me afterward? Edwin? I don't think so. Clive died 10 years ago. A heart attack in the store amongst the paint cans and boxes of nails. I found him when I came back from lunch. He was lying on the floor, staring up at the ceiling with blank eyes. After the funeral, I sold the store. It was enough to pay off my debts and put a little away for my old age. I got dressed and looked at myself in the mirror. A dark blue dress, the pearl brooch Clive had given me for my 20th wedding anniversary, a rare moment of generosity. My gray hair was gathered into a neat bun. I applied a little lipstick, a small concession to vanity. The phone rang and I flinched in surprise. Edwin? Finally remembered his mother's birthday? Hello? Mrs. Talbot? This is Janet from the book club. I just wanted to tell you there's no meeting today. Margaret has the flu and Elizabeth's away at her daughter's. Oh, was all I could say as disappointment flooded over me. Thank you for the heads up. Happy birthday, by the way. We remember. It just so happened with the cancellation. It's okay, Janet. Thanks for the birthday greeting. I hung up the phone and looked at myself in the mirror again. I had a whole day ahead of me and nothing to fill it with. We could go to the park, feed the ducks. We could go to the supermarket and get some groceries. We could watch TV. My gaze fell on a photograph on the dresser. All of us together, on a picnic in the park. Marilyn is about 12, with pigtails and a serious look. Patrick is about 10, with a busted knee and a smile missing 2 front teeth. Edwin, small, about 5 years old, sitting on my lap. And Clive, sober, smiling, with his hand on my shoulder. A rare moment of family happiness captured by some random passerby. I remember that day. How we roasted hot dogs on the coals, how the kids played badminton, how Clive told jokes that made us all laugh until we cried. This was before Marilyn began to shame us, before Patrick withdrew, before Edwin realized he could manipulate people. The phone rang again. This time, I took my time picking it up. Cell phone rings. Hello? Mom? It's Edwin. My heart shook, as it always did at the sound of his voice. No matter what, he's still my little boy. Edwin, hello. Happy birthday, Mom. I'm sorry it's so early, but I've got a lot to do today. Thank you, darling. How are you? I'm great. I'm terrific. Listen, I've got some news. I'm going to come and see you this weekend, okay? There's something important to discuss. I know that tone. It used to mean I failed my exams, then I got fired from my job, and lately it's more often I need money. Of course, darling, I'd love to see you. Great. And, I'm not coming alone. I'm going to introduce you to someone very special. A girlfriend? Edwin changed girlfriends as often as he changed jobs. The woman of my life, Mom. But we'll talk about that when we meet. I gotta run. I love you. He hung up before I could say anything back. Typical Edwin, always in a hurry, always on the run. I slowly sank to the edge of the bed. The woman of his life? The last time he talked like that was about Veronique, the French waitress who dumped him after a month when she realized he had no money. Or about Zoe, the aspiring actress who used his apartment to rehearse with her real-life boyfriend. Or about Danielle who... Never mind. I stood up and headed determinedly toward the closet. Since book club was canceled, I could do something useful, like going through some old stuff I'd been meaning to donate to charity for ages. In the closet, among the boxes of photos and old letters, I found a scrapbook of children's drawings. Edwin's drawings are bright, messy strokes depicting home, family, sunshine. In one of them, I'm holding his hand, drawn almost twice as tall as he really is, with a huge smile and hair like a crown. My mom is the best, it says in scrawled letters at the bottom. When did he stop thinking that? When did I stop being a heroine in his eyes and become just an ATM machine? I remembered working overtime to pay for his soccer uniforms, how I denied myself new clothes to buy him fancy sneakers, sitting up nights to help with homework even though I was exhausted. And then there were colleges, 1, 2, 3. Mom, this isn't my thing. I want to try something else. And I agreed, paying the bills, believing that one day he would find his calling. I remembered the night Clive had yelled at me, accusing me of spoiling my youngest too much. "You're making a slacker out of him," he'd yelled, waving a bottle at me. And I replied, "I just want him to have the opportunities we didn't have." But how did that turn out? Marilyn, who earned her own money for law school, barely talks to me. Patrick, who never asked for anything special, only calls on holidays. And Edwin, on whom I've spent the most time, money, and love, takes it all for granted. I closed the album and returned it to the closet. There's no point in wallowing in regret. What's done is done. The rest of the day passed in the usual chores: laundry, cleaning, cooking lunch, which I ate alone, watching the birds outside the window. In the evening, I watched an old movie on TV, then read a novel we were supposed to discuss at book club. The phone never rang again. Neither Marilyn nor Patrick remembered my birthday. Or maybe they remembered, but were too busy with their lives to call. Before I went to bed, I popped a pill for blood pressure, for arthritis, for insomnia, and looked at Clive's picture on the nightstand. "Look what our life has become," I said to his smiling face. "You're gone, and I'm left alone in an empty house with kids who barely remember me." Clive, of course, didn't answer. He'd never been particularly talkative, even in his lifetime. I turned off the light and lay staring into the darkness. Edwin would be here this weekend, with the woman of his life. I wonder what she's like, this new girl. I hope he has better luck this time. I hope she doesn't break his heart like the others. And I hope I don't have to put him back together again. I closed my eyes, feeling the pills start to take effect, fogging my mind. Tomorrow would be a new day. Just like today, and just like yesterday, and just like all the days before that, since I'd been alone in this house full of memories. Years of sacrifice, years of work, years of caring for others. And what was left for me? Silence, loneliness, and occasional calls from a son who needs something. But he's still my son, and I still love him no matter what. Because that's what mothers do: love their children unconditionally, even when it hurts. Saturday morning was surprisingly sunny for late October. I was up earlier than usual. Sleep has long been my unreliable companion. I was up at first light, preparing for the arrival of Edwin and his mysterious companion. The whole house was sparkling clean. I'd spent yesterday cleaning as if I expected royalty, not my own son, who'd spent years living among scattered socks and unwashed plates. But I wanted everything to be perfect. Maybe this new girl really is special. Maybe she would finally make my Edwin happy and responsible. I made his favorite apple pie, baked chicken and herbs, made potato salad from my mother's recipe. The table was set with the best tablecloth, the one we only used on special occasions when Clive was alive. The doorbell rang at 2 o'clock sharp, an unusual punctuality for Edwin, who was usually at least an hour late. I fixed my hair, smoothed the creases in my dress, and went to open the door. On the doorstep stood my son, handsome as ever, in a suit that clearly cost more than he could afford. Next to him was a tall, slender blonde with flawless makeup and cold blue eyes. Around her neck sparkled a necklace that looked too expensive for a casual visit to her future mother-in-law. "Mom!" Edwin hugged me with an enthusiasm that seemed a bit contrived. "You look beautiful. I'd like you to meet Priscilla. Priscilla Hart, the love of my life." The girl smiled a rehearsed smile and held out her hand with a perfect manicure. "Mrs. Talbot, it's so nice to finally meet you. Edwin has told me so much about you." Her voice was melodic, but something about it made me wary. Perhaps it was the slight note of condescension I'd learned to recognize over the years of working in the store, serving rich customers who looked down on me. "Please come in," I said, stepping aside. "Lunch is almost ready." They entered the house and I noticed Priscilla glancing around my modest living room, an old couch, a worn rug, family photos in plain frames. Something akin to disappointment flashed in her eyes. "What a cozy," she said, and I could almost physically feel the falseness in her compliment. "Thank you," I replied. "Clive and I bought it 45 years ago. Lots of memories." "Clive is Edwin's father?" she asked, though I was sure Edwin had already told her all about his family. "Yes, my late husband." "Oh, I'm sorry. Edwin said it happened a long time ago." 10 years ago? I turned to my son. "Edwin, why don't you show Priscilla around the house while I finish lunch?" He nodded, clearly relieved to get away from a potentially awkward conversation. "Sure, Mom. Come on, honey. I'll show you where my childhood was." I returned to the kitchen, listening to their footsteps and muffled voices on the second floor. Something about this Priscilla bothered me. Maybe it was the way she held herself, as if she were doing me a favor by being here, or the way she looked at Edwin not with love, but with a kind of calculating interest. 15 minutes later, they came downstairs, and I invited them to the table. Priscilla sat down with a perfectly straight back, as if she had swallowed a ruler. Edwin sat beside her, casting her a steady glance of adoration mixed with uncertainty. "Everything looks delicious, Mrs. Talbot," Priscilla said, as she put a tiny portion of salad on her plate. "Mama's the best cook in the world," Edwin said enthusiastically. "You have to try her apple pie. It's really something." "I follow a gluten-free diet," Priscilla replied with a slight smile. "But I'm sure the pie is wonderful." I noticed Edwin's shoulders slump a little. He'd always been sensitive to rejection, even minor ones. "So," I decided to lighten the mood. "How did you two meet?" Edwin perked up, clearly excited to tell the story. "It was like a movie, Mom. Remember, I got a job at that advertising firm 3 months ago? Priscilla is the senior creative director there. She just came into my office to get some paperwork, and I was just clearing out the clutter on my desk and accidentally dropped a stack of documents. And she helped me pick them up, and our hands touched, and I thought this clumsy newcomer was charming as hell." Priscilla finished for him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And then it turned out we had so much in common." "Yes, it's just unbelievable." Edwin looked at her with adoration. "We both love Italian food, Woody Allen movies, and traveling." I suppressed the urge to remind my son that he had never been farther than a neighboring state, and that all he knew about Italian food was pizza and spaghetti bolognese. But I didn't. Lovers often adjust to each other's interests, and there's nothing wrong with that. "What do you do at the advertising firm, Edwin?" I asked, even though I knew he worked in some junior position. "Oh, I'm the assistant client services manager," he said, as if he were at least the vice president of the company. "But Greg, my boss, hinted that I might get a promotion soon." "Edwin is a very promising employee," Priscilla confirmed, a note of sincerity in her voice for the first time. "He certainly has potential." "I'm glad to hear that." I was really glad. Maybe this girl really is a good influence on him. "And what do you do, Priscilla? Creative director, that sounds impressive." "I'm responsible for developing advertising campaigns for our key clients." She straightened up even more, if that was even possible. "They are mostly luxury brands, jewelry companies, designer clothes, luxury real estate. I have a master's degree in marketing from Princeton and a design degree from Parsons School of Art." "Impressive," I said sincerely. "And how old are you, if it's no secret?" 32, she replied with a smile that said, "And I look great for my age, don't I?" I did a quick count in my mind. Edwin is 28. The age difference is small, but considering the difference in career achievements, what do I care, though? If they're happy together, nothing else matters. "And you're in a committed relationship?" I asked, though it was obvious from the way they were holding each other. Edwin and Priscilla looked at each other, the same enigmatic smiles on their faces. "Actually, Mom," Edwin took Priscilla's hand, "we have news for you. We're engaged," Priscilla finished, extending her left hand, on which a large diamond ring glittered. I almost choked on a piece of chicken. They've only known each other for 3 months and they're already engaged? That's wonderful," I said, trying to sound sincere. "Congratulations to both of you." "Thank you, Mom." Edwin was glowing with happiness. I knew you'd be happy. We're planning to get married in the spring. So soon? I couldn't hide my surprise. April 16th, Priscilla clarified. That's the perfect time for the wedding we're planning. Everything is almost organized. You're very quick, I said, putting on more salad to keep my hands busy. When you know it's fate, why wait? Edwin brought Priscilla's hand to his lips and kissed her fingers. She smiled at him with the same cold smile that did not affect her eyes. And where will the wedding take place? I asked, anticipating that I wouldn't like the answer. At the Golden Oaks Country Club, Priscilla replied with apparent pleasure. It's the most prestigious wedding venue in the area. They have a stunning ballroom overlooking the lake and gorgeous gardens for photo shoots. I knew this club, or rather, I had heard of it. It's one of those places where people like me aren't even allowed on the doorstep. Membership there costs tens of thousands of dollars a year, and even for members, it costs astronomical sums to rent space for events. Sounds expensive, I said cautiously. It's worth it, Priscilla said. We want our day to be special. You have no idea, Mom, what a wedding it's going to be. Edwin excitedly stepped forward. 300 guests, including several celebrity clients of Priscilla's. A live band, a 5-tiered cake by the best pastry chef in town, fireworks over the lake as a finale. 300 guests? I couldn't hide my amazement. Edwin, you don't even know that many people. They're mostly colleagues, business associates, and friends of Priscilla's. He shrugged as if it didn't matter. Important connections for our future. And I thought weddings were for the nearest and dearest, I muttered. Times have changed, Mrs. Talbot. Priscilla gave me an indulgent smile. Modern weddings are also a social occasion, an opportunity to make an impression and build connections. I remained silent, realizing that any argument I made would be seen as old-fashioned and backward. What about your dress? I asked, trying to show interest in their plans. Priscilla's eyes lit up, for the first time in the whole conversation. Oh, it's something special. It's going to be an exclusive design by Vera Wang, sewn especially for me. I'm flying to New York next week for my first fitting. Vera Wang. Even I, far from the world of high fashion, knew that her dresses cost at least a few tens of thousands of dollars. What about you, Edwin? I turned to my son. An exclusive design too? A Tom Ford tuxedo. He puffed out his chest with pride. Priscilla says it's the best choice for a groom with my looks. I nodded, trying not to think about how much it cost. Who am I to judge? If they can afford it? And we ordered some amazing floral arrangements, Priscilla continued. Orchids and roses from all over the world, specially delivered for the day. And each guest will receive a personalized gift of an engraved silver box and a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne, Edwin added. I stopped chewing and slowly put down my fork. Something wasn't adding up here. Edwin, who a month ago had asked me for a loan of $500 to fix his car, was suddenly planning a wedding that would cost… Pardon my indiscretion, but how much will all this splendor cost you? I asked you directly. Priscilla and Edwin looked at each other again, but this time there was a kind of conspiratorial tension in their gazes. About $300,000, Edwin finally answered. But it's worth it, Mom. It's a once-in-a-lifetime day. I felt dizzy. $300,000, a sum that neither Edwin nor even the successful Priscilla could have for nothing. Who's going to pay for this wedding? My voice sounded weaker than I would have liked. There was a pause. Edwin cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. Well, actually, Mom, we thought you were going to help us with this. I stared at him, not believing my ears. Me? Edwin, I don't have that kind of money. But you have savings. He finally looked me in the eye. And the house is all paid off. You could take out a loan against the house. A home equity loan? I felt the blood drain from my face. Are you suggesting I risk the roof over my head for your extravagant wedding? It's not a risk, Mom, Edwin said as if he were explaining the obvious to a child. It's an investment in our future. After the wedding, I'll have connections that will help me advance my career. I'll be able to pay you back with interest. Edwin, I tried to speak calmly, you've changed 5 jobs in the last 3 years. Do you really expect me to believe a promise like that? This time it's different. He took Priscilla's hand as if drawing confidence from it. I have Priscilla to support me. And I've really found my calling in advertising. Priscilla nodded with the same condescending expression on her face. Mrs. Talbot, I understand your concern, but I assure you Edwin is on the right track. And this wedding is not just a celebration, but an important step in building our social network. Plus, Edwin added in a different tone, this is what normal mothers do, moms. They pay for their children's weddings. It's tradition. Tradition says that the bride's parents pay for the wedding, I objected, even though I knew I was grasping at straws. It's an outdated custom, Priscilla said. In today's world, it's paid for by whoever can. My parents died when I was a teenager, and I only have an aunt who barely makes ends meet. And my father left us no inheritance, Edwin said. Just you, Mom, and I know you have plenty of money after selling the store. I felt anger rising inside me. He spoke as if I were hiding some great wealth from him. Edwin, I said slowly, trying to control myself, the money from the sale of the store went to pay off your father's debts and to provide me with a minimum of comfort in my old age. I don't have the luxury of spending $300,000 on a one-day event. But it's my wedding, he exclaimed, and I could hear in his voice the tones of hysteria familiar to me from my childhood. Don't you want your only son to be happy? I have 3 children, Edwin, I reminded him, and I want all of you to be happy. But happiness is not measured in the cost of a wedding. That's what you think. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. Because you've never cared about status and prestige. Look at the way you live, in this old house with this old furniture with no ambition. His words hurt more than he could have imagined. How many nights had I stayed up worrying about how to pay the bills and still put something aside for his education? How many times had I denied myself new clothes to buy him the latest sneakers or the latest video game? Edwin, my voice trembled. I've spent my life taking care of you and your brother and sister. I don't regret it. But now I need to think about myself. I'm 73 years old, have arthritis that's progressing, and high blood pressure. My savings is all I have in case I get seriously ill. We'll take care of you if something happens, Edwin said quickly, but there was no certainty in his eyes. How? I looked at him point blank. You can barely take care of yourself, Edwin. You live from paycheck to paycheck, borrowing money all the time. How are you going to take care of an elderly mother with medical problems? He opened his mouth to object, but Priscilla put her hand on his shoulder, stopping him. Mrs. Talbot, she said in her melodious voice, which now had ice in it, we understand your concern, but perhaps you don't realize how important this wedding is to Edwin's future, our future. It's not just a celebration, it's an investment. An investment, I repeated. An investment in what exactly? In connections, in reputation, in social capital, she said with the confidence of a business presentation. In the world we work in, image is everything, and this wedding will give us the image we need. Besides, Edwin added with a hint of accusation in his voice, you've always said you'd do anything you could for me. Isn't it in your power to help your son on the most important day of his life? I looked at both of them, the son I loved more than life, despite his faults, and the cold, calculating woman he was about to marry. And suddenly I realized that they really suited each other, both living in a world of illusion, where external glitter is more important than internal content. I can't give you $300,000, I said firmly. That's all my savings and more. I could help with something more modest maybe to pay for a photographer or flowers. A photographer or flowers? Edwin jumped to his feet, his face red with anger. Are you suggesting we settle for something second-rate, when you have the opportunity to give us the best? I don't have that opportunity, Edwin. I stood up too, feeling my knees shake. And if you really wanted to marry Priscilla and not just to show off, you'd realize that it's not the price of the wedding that matters, but your feelings for each other. Don't lecture me. He slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes bounce. You're just selfish. All your life you've only thought about yourself. I recoiled as if he'd hit me. How could he say that, after all the sacrifices I'd made for him? Edwin, Priscilla's voice cut through the tense silence. I think we'd better leave. Your mother has made her position clear. She stood up and took his hand, as if to keep him from further emotional outbursts. Yes, you're right. Edwin took a deep breath, trying to calm down. There's nothing more for us to do here. Edwin, please. I stepped toward him, holding out my hand. Let's discuss this calmly. Maybe we can find some solution that we can all agree on. What kind of solution, Mom? He looked at me bitterly. You've made it clear that my happiness means nothing to you. It doesn't, and you know it. I felt tears coming to my eyes. I just can't risk everything I have for one day. One day that will define the rest of our lives, Priscilla interjected. But of course you don't have to understand that, Mrs. Talbot. They headed for the door and I followed, feeling everything I'd tried to hold on to crumble. Edwin, please don't go away like that. Let's talk. He stopped in the doorway and turned to me. There was a mixture of disappointment and determination in his eyes. You know what, Mom? You're going to regret this. We'll find a way to have our wedding without your help. And when you see the pictures in the magazines and realize what an opportunity you've missed, it'll be too late. Edwin. I held out my hand to him, but he turned and walked toward the car where Priscilla was waiting. I stood on the doorstep watching them drive away, and I felt another part of my life crumble. Everything I'd done, all the sacrifices I'd made, and this is how it turned out. My son thinks I'm selfish for not wanting to risk my future for his showy wedding. The door closed behind them and I was alone in the quiet of the house, where the table was still set for a celebratory dinner that had turned into a disaster. The apple pie, Edwin's favorite pie, remained untouched. I spent the 3 days after Edwin's visit in a daze. I slammed cupboard doors, mechanically cooked food that I couldn't eat, reviewed old photo albums where my youngest son was still smiling at me without a shadow of reproach or calculation. The phone was silent. Edwin hadn't called, and I hesitated to call him first. What could I say? My decision hadn't changed, and I wasn't going to apologize for not risking my future for his whim. On the 4th day, the phone rang. I grabbed the receiver, hoping to hear my son's voice. Mom, it's me. I felt both relieved and tense at the same time. Edwin sounded unusually calm, which was more alarming than his usual emotional outbursts. Edwin, I'm glad you called. I wanted to... Mom, I'm not calling for small talk, he interrupted me. I've discussed the situation with Priscilla and we've decided to give you another chance. Another chance? As if I were the one who'd wronged them. Edwin, I've already explained my position. I just don't have that kind of money. Listen to me carefully, Mother. I know you have savings. I know you can get a loan against the house. You just don't want to help your son. Edwin, No, now you listen to me. His voice got harder. Remember when I gave up my internship in Boston to be there for you after your father died? How I was the only one to help you sort through his things when Marilyn and Patrick didn't even show up. I remembered it differently. Edwin did stay in town, but only because he hadn't been accepted for that internship. I'd seen the rejection letter he'd forgotten to put away, and he was reluctant to help, constantly complaining and absenting himself on various excuses. I remember, Edwin, but do you remember when I took you to the doctor after your knee surgery 3 years ago? When your precious older kids didn't even call to check on you? That was an outright lie. Edwin took me to the hospital once and disappeared for a week, and Patrick came every day to help around the house. Marilyn couldn't come, but she called twice a day and paid for a nurse. Edwin, you're exaggerating. I am exaggerating. His voice broke into a scream. I'm the only one of your children who's always been there for you. And now when I need your help, just once in my life, you refuse me. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Edwin, I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, but $300,000 isn't just help. It's all my savings, it's my security in my old age. And who will take care of you in your old age, if not your children? He asked with icy logic. But if you refuse to help us now, why should we help you later? It was pure blackmail, and I felt anger boiling inside me. Are you threatening me, Edwin? Are you saying you'll leave me in my old age if I don't pay for your wedding? I'm just pointing out the facts, Mom. Relationships are a two-way street. You don't help me, I don't help you. All's fair. I clutched the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. That's not what I taught you, Edwin. I taught you to help others not because you expect something in return, but because it's the right thing to do. Save your sermons, Mother, he grinned, and I could almost see his lips curve contemptuously. The world has changed. Sentimentality is a luxury for those who can afford it. I can't believe you really think that, I whispered, feeling my eyes fill with tears. Believe it, Mom. And believe this, if you don't agree to help us with the money for the wedding, Priscilla and I are going to sue you. Sue? I was so shocked, I couldn't say anything more coherent. Yes, a lawsuit. We have witnesses who will testify that you promised to pay for my wedding when I was a teenager. That promise is enforceable. I never promised that, I exclaimed, finally finding my voice. It's word against word, Mom. And you know what? The court is more likely to believe a young couple building a life than an older woman who may have just forgotten her promise, especially when we have multiple witnesses. You're lying, Edwin. I felt something inside me snap. You're willing to lie under oath to get the money? I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure Priscilla and I have the wedding we deserve, he answered without a shadow of remorse. Think about it, Mom. You have a week to change your mind before we file suit. He hung up, leaving me in the deafening silence of the kitchen. I slowly lowered myself into a chair, feeling my knees shake. My own son was threatening me with a lawsuit. My own son was willing to lie to get my money. The week passed like a blur. I hardly slept at all, constantly replaying the conversation with Edwin in my head, trying to figure out how we'd gotten to this point. Where had I gone wrong in raising him? What had I done wrong? On the 8th day after his call, the doorbell rang. On the doorstep stood a young man in a strict suit with a folder in his hands. Mrs. Rowena Talbot? He asked in a formal tone. Yes, that's me. You have a summons. He handed me an envelope. The plaintiffs are Edwin Talbot and Priscilla Hart. You're charged with breach of oral contract and infliction of emotional distress. The hearing is set for 3 weeks from today in Frankfurt Town Court. I took the envelope with my naughty hands. The young man nodded and left, and I was left standing in the doorway, unable to move. He had really done it. My son had really sued me. I closed the door and walked slowly into the living room, sank into a chair, still clutching the envelope in my hands. Emotional damage. Breach of oral contract. The words danced before my eyes, refusing to form meaningful phrases. I don't know how long I sat like that, staring at the same spot. When I finally woke up, it was dark outside the window. I had to do something. But what? Hire a lawyer? I didn't have that kind of money. Defend myself? I didn't know anything about the law. And then it hit me. Marilyn. My oldest daughter was an attorney specializing in civil cases. We hadn't been close for years. She'd never forgiven me for not leaving Clive when his drinking became unbearable. But right now, I needed her help. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 10 o'clock at night. Too late for a call? Maybe. But I had no choice. With a racing heart, I dialed Marilyn's number. After the 5th ring, she answered. Marilyn Talbot? Her voice sounded professional and detached. Marilyn, it's Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. A pause, then. Mom, what's wrong? You never call this late. I need your help, honey. I took a deep breath. Edwin is suing me. What? She sounded genuinely surprised. Edwin sued you? For what? For refusing to pay for his wedding to Priscilla. Wait, what? What wedding? What Priscilla? Mom, start over. And I told her everything. About Edwin's visit with his fiancée. About their demand to pay for a $300,000 wedding. About my refusal. About his threatening phone call. And finally about the subpoena. Marilyn listened in silence, occasionally interrupting me with short questions. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, and then she said one word, bastard. Marilyn, don't say that about your brother, I said automatically, though I agreed with her in my heart. Mom, he's blackmailing you and filing a phony lawsuit. What else should I call him? She sighed. Look, I'll fly in tomorrow. I need to see that subpoena and talk to you in person. You're coming? I couldn't believe my ears. But what about your job, your family? I'll take some time off, and James will be fine with the kids for a couple days. This is important, Mom. I'm not going to let Edwin terrorize you. I felt a lump come up in my throat. Thank you, darling. Yeah, I don't know what I'd do without you. Don't thank me until I win the case, she said with the confidence of a professional. I'll fly in tomorrow night. Meet me at the airport at 7, okay? Of course, darling. I'll be there. And Mom? She paused. I'm glad you called. I'm sorry it took a situation like this. Me too, honey, I whispered. Me too. The next day, I met Marilyn at the airport. She had changed since the last time I'd seen her at Christmas 2 years ago. She was more confident, more elegant. Her business suit fit her flawlessly. Her short haircut emphasized her beautiful neckline. Marilyn had always been the prettiest of my children, though she never made a big deal of it. Mom, she hugged me, and I could smell her subtle, expensive perfume. You've lost weight, and you look tired. The last few weeks haven't been the easiest, I admitted with a forced smile. But now that you're here, I feel better. We drove home, and all the way home, Marilyn questioned me about the details. When exactly Edwin had introduced Priscilla, what exactly they'd said about the wedding, how they'd phrased their demand for money. She jotted down my answers in a small notebook, sometimes frowning and shaking her head. At home, I showed her the court summons. Marilyn scrutinized the document, making notes. They're seeking $300,000 in damages and court costs, she said, setting the papers aside. The grounds are breach of oral contract and infliction of emotional distress. They claim that you promised Edwin you'd pay for his wedding when he was 16, and that promise was part of your family agreement. I never promised any such thing, I exclaimed. I may have said something like, someday you'll get married and we'll have a beautiful wedding. But that was just motherly talk, not a promise to pay for an extravagant $300,000 celebration. I believe you, Mom. Marilyn put her hand on mine. And the court will believe you too. Oral contracts must be specific and mutually beneficial to be enforceable. Vague promises don't fall under the definition. But Edwin said he had witnesses. I was still worried. What if he found someone to lie under oath? Then we'll break down their testimony during cross-examination. Marilyn spoke with such confidence that I was involuntarily relieved. But I need to know more about Edwin's relationship with you and the money. Did he often ask you for money? I grinned unhappily. All the time. Ever since he graduated high school. First for college, then for an apartment, then for a car, then for car repairs. The list goes on and on. And you gave? Usually, I felt myself blush with embarrassment. Sometimes as a gift, sometimes as a loan that he promised to pay back but never did. Do you have proof of these loans? Checks, bank statements, receipts? I've been thinking. There must be bank statements. I keep all my bank records. And I have a notebook where I write down how much I gave and what I gave it for. I know it's silly. It's not stupid, Mom. Marilyn looked at me seriously. It could save you in court. Where's that notebook? I got up and walked over to the secretary in the corner of the living room. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a shabby leather-bound notebook. Here. I held it out to Marilyn. I started keeping it after your father died, when Edwin started asking for money especially often. Marilyn opened the notebook and flipped through the pages. Her eyebrows rose higher and higher as she turned the pages. Mom, there are tens of thousands of dollars in here over the last 10 years, and that's just the loans, not counting the things you've given him for birthdays and holidays. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of embarrassment and relief that someone was finally seeing how much I'd given to my youngest son. I know. I tried to help him get back on his feet, but every time something new happened, he lost his job or his car broke down, or he needed to pay off credit card debt. Did he ever pay you back any of that money? Marilyn asked, though her tone made it clear she already knew the answer. No, I shook my head. Always promising, but never giving it back. Marilyn closed the notebook and put it on the table. Mom, I think we should countersue. A countersuit? I didn't know what she was talking about. For what? For unpaid loans. Marilyn straightened up, a predatory glint in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Edwin wants to play dirty? Good. We'll show him what that means. We'll demand all the money you've lent him over the years back, with interest. But he'll never be able to pay back that much, I objected, shocked by her suggestion. Exactly, Marilyn smiled, and there was nothing warm about it. And when the judge sees how much you've already given Edwin and how much he owes you, his lawsuit will look not just baseless, but downright insolent. I looked at my daughter, not recognizing her. When did that little girl with pigtails who cried over every wounded bird turn into such a ruthless strategist? Do you really think we should do this? I asked uncertainly. It could ruin our family forever. Mom! Marilyn took my hands. Edwin already destroyed the family when he decided to sue you. He's declared war and we have to defend ourselves, not out of revenge, but to protect you and your future." I took a deep breath. She was right, as bitter as it sounded. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's file a countersuit." Marilyn nodded and opened her notebook again. "I'll prepare all the documents. We'll need bank statements, witness statements. Perhaps Patrick can corroborate some of the facts? And all the evidence we can gather." "Patrick?" I was surprised. "You want to drag Patrick into this?" "Mom, this is a family matter. Patrick needs to know what's going on and decide which side he's on. I never thought of it in those terms." "Whose side?" But Marilyn was right. Edwin, with his lawsuit, forced all of us to choose sides. "I'll call him tomorrow," I said tiredly. "It's too late now." "Good." Marilyn stood up. "Now you need to get some rest. We'll have a lot of work tomorrow." She leaned over and kissed me on the cheek, a gesture I hadn't seen from her in years. "Good night, Mom, and don't worry. We won't let Edwin win this battle." I watched her walk up the stairs, confident, strong, determined. My daughter, who had come to protect me despite years of estrangement. Maybe something good will come out of this whole nightmare, I thought. Maybe I could finally rebuild a relationship with at least one of my older children. The next day, Marilyn and I began preparing for trial. She had drafted a counterclaim, demanding that Edwin pay back all the money I'd lent him over the past 10 years, an amount she estimated at over $120,000, not including interest. "We'll file the countersuit tomorrow," Marilyn said, closing her laptop. "And we'll see how Edwin reacts when he gets the summons." I'd never been to the courthouse. The grand red brick structure, with its tall columns and wide staircase, was awe-inspiring and unsettling. Marilyn's hand supporting me under my elbow was the only thing that gave me the strength to climb those steps. "It's going to be okay, Mom," she said, as if reading my mind. "We have a strong case and irrefutable evidence." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The last 3 weeks passed in feverish preparation. Marilyn had worked like a man possessed, gathering documents, interviewing witnesses, strategizing the defense. Patrick, upon learning of what was happening, immediately took my side and provided an affidavit about how Edwin had taken advantage of my kindness over the years. Inside, the courthouse looked even more impressive: marble floors, high ceilings, heavy wooden doors. We found the right room and took seats at the defendant's table. Marilyn laid out neat folders of documents in front of her, numbered and marked with colorful stickers. "Here they are," she whispered, nodding toward the entrance. I turned around and saw Edwin and Priscilla entering the hall. My son looked tense, but determined. He was wearing an expensive suit that I was sure he couldn't afford. Priscilla, impeccable as always, walked beside him with her head held high. Their lawyer followed with a smug smile on his face. Our eyes met Edwin's across the hall, and I felt my heart clench. There was not a shadow of remorse or doubt in his gaze, only cold determination. He quickly averted his eyes and sat down at the plaintiff's table, whispering something to Priscilla. The judge, an older man with gray hair and shrewd eyes, entered the room. Judge Willis, as the court clerk introduced him, had a reputation for fairness and strictness. "All rise. Case number 827, fraction 25, Edwin Talbot and Priscilla Hart v. Rowena Talbot, before Judge Herbert Willis." We stood up and I felt my knees shake. The judge took his seat and looked intently at both sides. "Please be seated," he said, and his voice sounded calm and confident. "We are here to hear a claim for breach of oral contract and emotional distress, as well as a counterclaim for unpaid loans. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone here that this is a family matter, and I hope that despite their differences, the parties will remain respectful of each other." Zachary Pratt, Edwin's attorney, rose from his seat and walked to the center of the room. "Your Honor, my clients, Edwin Talbot and Priscilla Hart, an engaged couple planning a wedding, are facing a treacherous breach of promise by Mr. Talbot's mother, defendant Rowena Talbot." He paused dramatically, glancing around the auditorium where several spectators had already gathered, mostly reporters from the local newspaper and curious Frankfurt residents drawn to the unusual case. When Mr. Talbot was 16 years old, his mother had promised him that she would pay for his wedding when the time came. It was not just a casual remark, but a serious promise made in the presence of witnesses. Mr. Talbot had built his life plans around that promise. And now that he had finally found the love of his life and was preparing to marry, his mother was reneging on her promise, thereby breaking an oral contract and causing my clients significant emotional harm. I listened to this speech with growing indignation. Every word was a lie or a distortion of the truth. I had never made such a promise to Edwin, and he knew it well. Marilyn stood up for her opening statement. Your Honor, the plaintiff's allegations are not only baseless, they are an attempt at financial fraud. My client, Rowena Talbot, never made a promise to her son to pay for his wedding, much less a wedding costing $300,000, an amount that exceeds all of her savings. Marilyn paused, giving this information a chance to penetrate the minds of those present. Moreover, Edwin Talbot had been financially supported by his mother for years, borrowing large sums of money from her, which he had never repaid. As stated in the counterclaim, the total amount of unpaid loans amounted to over $120,000, exclusive of interest. A surprised whisper ran through the auditorium. I noticed some of the audience turn around to look at Edwin, who now looked less certain. Edwin was the first witness to be called. After taking the oath, he sat down, looking straight ahead, avoiding my gaze. Mr. Talbot, Pratt began, tell the court about the day your mother promised to pay for your wedding. Edwin cleared his throat and began to speak. It was on the day of my 16th birthday. We were sitting around a celebratory table, me, Mom, Dad, and a few family friends. We were discussing my future, and Mom said, "Don't worry about money, Edwin. Dad and I will take care of your education, and when it's time to get married, I'll pay for your wedding. That's a promise." I clenched my fists under the table. It was an outright lie. The day of Edwin's 16th birthday, Clive had been so drunk he could barely speak, and we hadn't even had a celebratory dinner, just a quick cake after school until Dad came back from the bar. And who was present for that conversation? Pratt asked. Our neighbors, Gregory and Eleanor Finch, my high school friend Derek Simmons, and of course, my father. During cross-examination, Marilyn masterfully demolished Edwin's version of events. Mr. Talbot, you claim that our mother promised to pay for your wedding on your 16th birthday, in the presence of Gregory and Eleanor Finch, Derek Simmons, and your father, is that correct? Yes, that's correct, Edwin replied confidently. Interesting. Marilyn walked over to the desk and picked up one of her folders. Because I have here a notarized statement from Derek Simmons, in which he states that he did not attend your 16th birthday party because he was in the hospital that day with appendicitis. I also have medical records that confirm this fact. A whisper ran through the room. Edwin turned slightly pale but quickly pulled himself together. I must have made a mistake. It wasn't Derek but another friend. Which friend? Marilyn asked, not giving him time to think. I don't remember exactly. It was years ago. What about Gregory and Eleanor Finch? Are you sure they were present? Absolutely, Edwin said firmly. Then how do you explain the fact that Gregory Finch died 2 years before your 16th birthday? Marilyn pulled another document out of the folder. I have here Gregory Finch's death certificate and an obituary from the local paper. Edwin's face now expressed obvious concern. He cast a quick glance at his lawyer, who looked equally anxious. Marilyn continued her questioning. You claim to have always been close to our mother, especially after our father's death. How often did you visit her in the last year? Edwin squirmed in his seat. I've been busy with work, but I've tried to visit as often as possible. What about last fall when our mother had knee surgery? How many times did you visit her during rehab? I was very busy with work during that time. You mean none? Marilyn raised an eyebrow. I have statements from the nurse who took care of Mom and our brother Patrick, who came every day. Both claim you didn't show up once in the 2 weeks of her recovery. I did call, Edwin objected weakly. Once to ask for money for a new cell phone, Marilyn parried. Mr. Talbot, let's talk about money. How many times in the last 10 years have you borrowed money from our mother? Sometimes she helped me financially, Edwin answered cautiously, like any mother helps her child. How many times exactly? And for how much in total? I didn't keep account. Fortunately, our mother did. Marilyn pulled out a leather-covered notebook. According to her records, supported by bank statements, You've borrowed $122,640 from her over the last 10 years. Have you repaid a dime of that amount? Edwin was silent, his face flushed with anger or shame. I couldn't tell. Mr. Talbot, answer the question, the judge reminded him. No, Edwin said at last. But I was going to. I just didn't have the opportunity. Yet you have the opportunity to plan a wedding for $300,000? Marilyn shook her head. Mr. Talbot, do you know what our mother has been saving for all these years? Old age, I suppose, Edwin muttered. For medical expenses, Marilyn walked over to the judge and handed him a folder. Your Honor, these are my client's medical records. She has advanced arthritis that requires expensive treatment and heart problems that may require surgery in the near future. Her health insurance only covers a fraction of the costs. The money the plaintiff is demanding for his extravagant wedding is literally money to save his mother's life. The judge looked over the documents and his face grew serious. He looked at Edwin and there was condemnation in his eyes. Mr. Talbot, were you aware of your mother's medical problems? Yeah, I knew she had some health problems, Edwin answered uncertainly, but I didn't think they were that serious. Because you never asked, Marilyn remarked. I have no further questions for the witness, Your Honor. The next witness was Priscilla. She looked impeccable in her expensive suit and spoke confidently, confirming Edwin's version of events. Under Marilyn's cross-examination, however, she became confused about details, and it became obvious that her testimony had been carefully rehearsed, but did not stand up to critical scrutiny. Pratt then summoned Eleanor Finch, Gregory's widow, who had allegedly been present at that very conversation at Edwin's birthday party. Mrs. Finch, Pratt began, were you present at Edwin Talbot's 16th birthday party? Yes, of course, she answered confidently. My late husband and I were good friends of the Talbot family. And you heard Rowena Talbot promise to pay for her son's wedding? Absolutely, I did. She said, when it's time to get married, I'll pay for your wedding. That's a promise. I remember that well because I thought how generous of her. Marilyn quickly destroyed that testimony as well, revealing that Eleanor was an aunt to Priscilla, which undermined the credibility of her testimony. When it was the defendant's turn, Marilyn called me. I sat down on the witness stand, feeling my heart pounding hard. Mrs. Talbot, Marilyn began in a formal tone, did you ever promise your son Edwin that you would pay for his wedding? No, I answered firmly. I might have said something like, someday you'll get married and we'll have a beautiful wedding. But that was just motherly talk, not a specific promise to pay for a $300,000 wedding. Tell the court about your financial situation. I took a deep breath. After my husband died 10 years ago, I sold our family store. The proceeds were used to pay Clive's debts and to build up a small emergency fund for me for my old age. I live on a small pension and interest from those savings. Over the last 10 years, I've lent Edwin a considerable amount of my money, hoping to help him get back on his feet. And exactly how much did you lend him? Over $120,000. I looked at Edwin, who lowered his eyes. I always helped him whenever I could, paid for his education, got him out of credit card debt a few times, gave him money for rent when he was evicted for non-payment. I never turned him down until he asked for an amount that would have effectively bankrupted me. Why is it so important for you to keep these savings? I have serious health problems, I said calmly, though my insides ached at the thought of discussing such personal matters in public. My arthritis is getting worse, and the doctors say I may need joint replacement surgery soon. I also have heart problems that may also require surgery. My health insurance doesn't cover many of the costs, and without savings, I won't be able to get the treatment I need. After me, Marilyn called Patrick, who flew in specifically for the trial. My middle son spoke confidently and sincerely, describing how Edwin had taken advantage of my generosity for years, rarely showing up when help was needed, but always showing up when money was needed. Mom never said no to him, Patrick said, looking at his brother with undisguised disappointment. She always said, he's still young, he's got everything ahead of him. Even when my sister and I saw that he was just using her. Then the neighbors spoke up, confirming that Edwin rarely visited me, even when I was sick. The nurse who cared for me after my knee surgery told how Edwin never showed up once during rehab, while Patrick came daily. Finally, my physician, Dr. Harris, confirmed the seriousness of my medical problems and the need for expensive treatment in the near future. Without adequate financial resources, he concluded, Mrs. Talbot's quality of life would be greatly diminished, and in the worst-case scenario, her condition could become life-threatening. When all the witnesses had been interviewed, the judge announced that he was ready to rule. The hall fell silent. I looked at Edwin, who now looked pale and uncertain. Priscilla sat next to him, her face impenetrable. Having considered all the evidence presented, Judge Willis began, I conclude that the claim of Edwin Talbot and Priscilla Hart is without merit. There is insufficient evidence of an oral contract between Rowena Talbot and her son regarding payment for the wedding. Moreover, the testimony of the plaintiffs and their witnesses contains substantial contradictions that undermine their credibility. A sigh of relief ran through the room. I felt Marilyn squeeze my hand. As to the counterclaim, the judge continued, the court recognizes that Edwin Talbot does owe his mother a substantial amount of money, borrowed and not repaid. The court orders him to pay Rowena Talbot $122,640, together with interest at the rate of 5% per annum from the date of each loan. I looked at Edwin, his face contorted with horror, as he realized the full extent of his defeat. Not only had he not gotten the money he needed, but now he was obligated to pay back everything he had borrowed from me over the years. Even worse, the whole town now knew that he had tried to sue his sick mother for the last of her savings for his extravagant wedding. Priscilla whispered something in his ear, her face expressing cold disappointment. Edwin nodded slowly without looking at her. The judgment is hereby pronounced, Judge Willis concluded with a bang of his gavel. This court is now adjourned. Marilyn hugged me, whispering words of congratulations. I felt a strange mixture of relief and bitterness. I had won the case, but I had lost my son. Although, to be honest, I had lost him long before we were in that courtroom. As we left the courtroom, I watched Edwin and Priscilla hurriedly leave the building through a side exit, avoiding the reporters who were already crowding the main entrance. My son's face was contorted with horror and humiliation, horror at the debt he was now obligated to pay, and humiliation at the fact that the whole town had learned of his attempt to rip off his own mother. When Judge Willis announced his decision, I felt a strange lightness, as if the weight that had been weighing on my shoulders for years had suddenly disappeared. The court dismissed Edwin's suit in its entirety and, what's more, ordered him to pay me back all the money he had borrowed over the years. $122,640, plus interest. You won, Mom. Marilyn hugged me in the courtroom. Justice had been served. I nodded, unable to say a word. Yes, it was a victory, but at what cost? My youngest son stood on the other side of the room, his face contorted with shock and humiliation. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw something new in his gaze. Not anger, not resentment, but realization. A realization of what he had done and perhaps shame. But the moment was short-lived. Priscilla, whose face expressed cold fury, grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the exit. They left the hall without a word. I didn't know then if I would ever see my son again. Marilyn and Patrick surrounded me with care, keeping me from sinking into sad thoughts. We walked out of the courthouse to the clicks of local reporters' cameras. The story of a mother whose own son tried to rob her of her last savings was too juicy for a small town. Don't pay attention, Marilyn whispered as she led me to the car. Tomorrow they'll find a new sensation. At home, we had a celebratory dinner organized by Deirdre, Patrick's wife. She came over with the kids while we were in court and cooked my favorite meals. My grandchildren, 10-year-old Miles, 8-year-old Olivia, and 5-year-old Harrison, rushed toward me, hugging and gushing about their adventures. Grandma, I won the school swimming competition, shouted Miles. And I drew a picture that hangs in the school hallway, Olivia kept up. And I learned how to tie my shoelaces, proudly declared little Harrison, pointing to his shoes. I hugged them, laughing through my tears. How long it had been since they had been in my house, how much I had missed in their lives. At dinner, Patrick raised his glass. To Mom, who was always our rock and never asked for anything in return. We're sorry to you, Mom, but things will be different now. Everyone joined in the toast. Even the children raised their juice glasses, earnestly repeating, "To Grandma!" Later, when the kids were asleep and we were sitting in the living room with cups of tea, Marilyn said something she had apparently wanted to say for a long time. "Mom, I want to apologize for all these years of estrangement. I was so angry with you for not leaving Dad when his drinking became unbearable. I thought it was weakness, but now I realize it was strength to stay and continue to care for us no matter what." I took her hand. "You don't have to apologize, dear. We each did what we thought was right, and I never held a grudge against you." "I should apologize too," Patrick interjected. "I wasn't around as much as I should have been. I've always made excuses work, kids, home. But the truth is, I just didn't want to see you grow old and Edwin take advantage of your kindness." "You were both busy with your lives," I replied. "It's only natural. You have your families, your worries." "But you are our family too," Marilyn said firmly. And we were not to forget that. We talked late into the night, reminiscing about the past, sharing stories from our lives, making plans for the future. For the first time in years, I felt like my older children were really with me, not just physically, but emotionally. The next morning, over breakfast, Marilyn announced her decision. "I've taken a month's vacation. I want to stay here with you, Mom. We have a lot of catching up to do." I was so touched, I couldn't hold back my tears. "But your job, your family." "James will be fine with the kids," she smiled. "Besides, they'll be here for the weekend, and work isn't going anywhere. I can do some things remotely." Patrick has also decided to take a week off to spend time with me and Marilyn. "Deirdre and the kids will stay too," he said. "The house will be full of life, just like the old days." I couldn't believe my happiness. After so many years of loneliness, my house was once again filled with voices, laughter, and warmth. A week after the trial, I received a letter from Edwin. A short note, just a few lines. "Mom, I don't know if I'll ever be able to atone for what I've done, but I will try. Priscilla's gone. I think it's for the best. I'm starting fresh. Edwin." No apology, no promise of a refund, but I hadn't expected it. For Edwin to admit he was wrong was already a big step. "Give him time," Marilyn said when I showed her the letter. "He has a lot to realize." I nodded, knowing she was right. No matter how much Edwin hurt me, he was still my son. And I still loved him, no matter what. The local newspaper ran an article about our case under the headline, "Mother wins lawsuit against son who demanded money for wedding." The reporter, a young woman named Haley Ramirez, asked to interview me. I agreed, hoping my story would help other seniors in a similar situation. "Mrs. Talbot," she asked, "what advice would you give to other parents whose adult children require financial support?" I wondered. "I would say, love your children, help them when you can, but not to your own detriment. You are entitled to your life, your plans, your security, and true love should never be one-sided." The article generated an unexpected response. People started calling and writing to me, some to share similar stories, others to express support. Janet from a book club suggested I become its leader. "You have life experience and wisdom worth sharing," she said, "and you've always loved books." So I became the leader of the book club at the local library. We met once a week discussing not only books but also life, sharing stories and experiences. Many of the participants were elderly like me, but gradually younger people began to join us. It was amazing to see different generations finding common ground through literature. Marilyn, watching my new endeavors, once said, "You know, Mom, you've always loved teaching. You could teach courses or workshops at a community center." The idea seemed absurd to me at first. Me, a simple woman with a college degree, what could I teach others? "You have a lot of business experience," Marilyn reminded me. "You and your father ran a store for decades. You're also a great cook, knitter, know a lot of stories about our town." I thought about it and I decided to take a chance. I applied to the community center for the Home Economics for Modern Living course. To my surprise, the application was accepted with enthusiasm. And even more surprising was the fact that 15 people came to the first class, from teenagers to young parents. "In school, they teach us algebra and chemistry," said one young mother, "but no one explains how to plan a budget, cook a simple meal, or fix leaky socks." That's how I became a teacher. I taught classes twice a week, sharing practical skills and worldly wisdom. Seeing my students' eyes light up when they learned a new skill was incredibly inspiring. I decided to spend some of the money from the trial, although Edwin has only paid a small portion so far, on myself. All my life I had been saving, denying myself small pleasures. Now it was time to live for myself. My first folly was a trip to Europe, a lifelong dream. Marilyn helped me organize a 2-week tour of Italy and France. I was afraid to go alone, so Patrick suggested that his oldest son, my grandson Miles, come with me. It would be good for him to spend time with his grandmother and see the world, he said. And you'll feel more comfortable with a companion. That trip was one of the most vivid experiences of my life. To see the Colosseum and the Eiffel Tower, to taste real Italian pasta and French croissants, to walk along narrow European streets. It all seemed like a dream. And to share these impressions with my grandson, to see the world through his eyes, was especially valuable. You know, Grandma, Miles said as we sat in a small cafe in Rome, I used to think that old people were boring, but you're not like that at all. You're cool. I laughed. Thank you, darling. But remember, age doesn't make people boring or interesting. It makes their attitude towards life. When I returned home, I found that my life had been completely transformed. My home was no longer a quiet fortress of solitude. There were now frequent visitors, children, grandchildren, and new friends from the book club and community center. Marilyn, back in Chicago, called every day and visited once a month. Patrick and his family now visited me every weekend. Even Edwin began to slowly come back into my life. Short calls at first, then infrequent visits. He'd taken a new job, more modest than his previous one, but more stable. And he started paying off his debt little by little, small amounts, but regularly. I don't expect you to ever pay it all back, I told him once. It's more important to me that you try to right the wrongs. He nodded without looking me in the eye. I was a terrible son. You were a messed up person, I corrected him gently. And still my son, whom I love. It was the beginning of a long road to rebuilding our relationship, a journey we were both willing to take. We didn't talk about Priscilla. I learned from Marilyn that she broke off the engagement the day after the trial when it became clear there would be no money for a lavish wedding. A month later, she got engaged to the son of the owner of a local construction company, a young man with a much more stable financial situation than Edwin's. Are you in pain? I cautiously asked my son when he first told me about the breakup. It did hurt, he admitted. But I realize now that she never loved me. She wanted status, a way of life that I couldn't give her. I was just a means to an end. I hugged him, feeling him relax in my arms for the first time in a long time. A year after the trial, my house was full of guests. We were celebrating my 74th birthday. All my kids, their families, friends from book club and the community center. Even Judge Willis stopped by to congratulate me. You've been an inspiration to many in our town, Mrs. Talbot, he said, shaking my hand. Your story showed me that it's never too late to start living for yourself. I smiled, looking at the people around me. Marilyn chatting animatedly with my students from the community center. Patrick playing with the children in the garden. Edwin sitting quietly in the corner, but still here, part of our family. Miles showing pictures from our trip to his cousins. A life that seemed finished a year ago took on new meaning and new colors. I was no longer just a mother, a grandmother, a widow. I was Rowena Talbot, a teacher, a traveler, a book club leader, a woman who had finally learned to value herself the way she had always valued others. I stepped out onto the porch, savoring the warm evening air. The sunset was coloring the Frankfurt sky with pinks and golds. The same Frankfurt where I'd lived all my life, the town that knew me as Clive's wife, mother of 3, store owner. And now it knew me as a woman who had defended her right to her own life. Marilyn followed me out and stood beside me, putting her hand on my shoulder. What are you thinking about, Mom? I smiled, looking out at the sunset. About how sometimes the end of one story becomes the beginning of another, much more interesting one. She hugged me tightly and we stood like that, watching the day give way to night and the past to the future.